Young Justice is a show based off of the comic book of the same name, but when I say based off of, I mean that pretty liberally, because Young Justice as a show rarely takes much of anything from the actual comic book run that it shares a name with. Rather, the show's version of Young Justice had a very different starting three, with Dick Grayson's Robin, Kid Flash, and Aqualad, as compared to Tim's Robin, Superboy, and of course, Bart Allen as Impulse. So I was actually pretty excited to see Impulse finally make his debut in the second season of Young Justice, and boy, I couldn't have been prepared at all for the chaos that he would bring to the second season of this show. But if you want to be prepared for the next time that I drop a video talking about Young Justice and other superhero shows, go ahead and sub to me down below and leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. When we meet Bart Allen for the very first time, he is from a world that has been devastated by war, Reach overtake, and by supervillains finally getting the one up on superheroes. This is immediately already quite a far departure from the Bart Allen that we know in the comics, who just kind of gets transported back into normal times and his 30th century future isn't necessarily destroyed. As well, this version of Bart Allen is only 40 years into the future rather than being in the 30th century. In this timeline, the Flash was killed by a villain named Neutron while under the control of the Reach. And so he's sending Bart Allen on a one-way trip to the past with a cure for Neutron, but with two objectives: to save the Flash and to prevent Blue Beetle from falling under the control of the Reach.
I know, Nathaniel. Big mission. Lots to do. Better get to it.
When Bart lands in the present time, he comes to find Tim Drake's Robin, Nightwing, and Beast Boy, who are currently hanging out in the cave, all doing basically reconnaissance. And when Impulse lands, he makes quite the splash entrance. And ultimately, because they view him as an intruder, the three heroes are ultimately trying to chase and capture Impulse so they can figure out A, what he is, B, who he is, and C, where he came from, considering he quite literally just teleported in on a time travel machine that is only 40 years more advanced than where they were at this point, which is kind of crazy to think about. But either way, he is, due to his inexperience and the fact that Nightwing has spent a lot of time with another speedster in Kid Flash, caught, apprehended, and is currently being interrogated by the team, and more aptly by Beast Boy, who is so self-assured that he will lead the team one day. It's one of his questions for the future.
When do I become leader of the team? When do I join the Justice League? When do I get my own reality series?
That last one is really funny considering how season 3 would go for Beast Boy. Anyways, focusing again on Bart, he is just really stalling for time until he can escape his binds, and we're immediately shown that Impulse is faster than Kid Flash, just off the basis that Impulse was able to phase through his cuffs, and this is something that we never saw Kid Flash being able to do, once again reaffirming that Wally is by far the slowest of all of the speedsters. Again, another large departure from the comics, but the show was never really trying to be that accurate, more embodying the spirit of these characters and bringing them on new narratives than just being one-for-one copies. But there are some things that they share in common. For example, Bart is very much showing off his ADHD, hyperactive, very fun-loving personality with spoiling the future for everybody involved at the party, something that he is not supposed to do to try and keep the timeline as intact as possible.
Dad? Hi, Aunt Dawn.
Wait, there are two in there?
We're having twins?
Oops! Spoilers.
This is also the first time that Bart gets to meet Kid Flash, and it's very much worth noting that Bart in this scene, and since he's been to the 21st century, has been fairly whimsical and happy and upbeat relative to how we saw him first, which was pretty serious, all things considered, with him being from the future, a pretty dystopian future. And with all of the introductions out of the way, it's finally time that Bart took care of business now that Neutron has started his attack on the city, which is all being orchestrated by the Reach in the background, who are controlling Neutron via his suit and some sort of neural implant. I'm not 100% sure on that piece. I just know that they're controlling him. And Bart is there specifically to ensure that Flash does not die, as it was on this day in his timeline that the Flash was killed. But this also presents Bart a time to have fun and get to actually interact with his family, and as well get to interact with other speedsters, something he doesn't really have in the future, which means he can finally speak at his normal thought processing speed.
Around the perimeter of the explosive wave.
The funnel draws him upward, and we move him out of the city. Piece of cake.
It's very interesting that we see him play the ditzy, starry-eyed, extremely just happy to be there speedster at the very beginning, but it's actually during this fight that we see him take on a far more serious role. When the Reach see that Neutron isn't going to play their game, mainly because he's getting his ass whooped by all three Flashes, they ultimately decide to just detonate him permanently, i.e. try to blow up as much of the city as possible. And it's in this moment that Bart decides he actually has to lock in and cure Neutron as fast as possible, using the cure that he was given by Nathaniel, who is Neutron, back in the past. That way he can help to set the timeline straight so that the Reach cannot just take over Earth. As eliminating Flash, who is probably one of the Reach's biggest threats and one of the key components in stopping them at the very end of the season, this is probably a pretty smart idea on their part to try and get rid of him. So Bart has to ensure this doesn't happen. And Bart actually, for the record, nearly fails at this. If it wasn't for the fact that Jay Garrick comes out of retirement to run the Flash away from Neutron's second detonation, then everybody there would have genuinely died, even with Bart's involvement. Mainly because Bart messed up and ended up tripping the Flash and himself and almost got them all killed. Again, he's showcasing that he is a rookie. This is really his first mission, and honestly, probably one of the very few times that he's gotten to use his powers, as in the future, Bart pretty much doesn't get to use them very much due to the fact that he is inhibited by a meta-collar put on him by Blue Beetle and the Reach. With Neutron being cured, that would leave Bart finally done with at least half of his mission. The Flash will survive, who will then help to stop the Reach at the very end of the season. And of course, now he just has to make sure that Blue Beetle doesn't fall under Reach control. But in order to keep the timeline as safe as possible, Bart pretends that he can go back to the future and ultimately pretends to be stranded. Now, the information I gave you at the start of the video was actually told to us at the end. When you're watching this episode for the very first time, you think that Bart can actually go back to the past, but it's revealed that this was the plan all along. It was for him to be stranded in the past so that he could change the future. But he can't tell too much of what's going to happen in the future because it would risk destabilizing the timeline further, and he'd lose his script for what to do in order to try and help as many people as possible. And as we see at the end of the episode, while Neutron's life was changed, ultimately he still has to help in destroying the Reach's invasion and keeping Blue Beetle safe and away from Reach control. Otherwise, the world is still doomed. This immediately creates a very different version of Impulse than the one that we're used to in the OG Young Justice comics and just in general. This version of Impulse is a survivor from a world that is devastated and destroyed, and he is actively trying to do his best to save the people he can in the past, while also finally getting to grow up and have somewhat of a normal life at the same time. This version of Bart, while he keeps his ADHD, I'm bouncing off the walls, I'm having fun, it's also tempered by the fact that he has this very serious duty and weight on his shoulders to save the rest of the future, one that he won't get to see for another 40 years. And while he might be kind of a rookie and he might make a lot of mistakes, he's still ultimately portrayed to be a very serious about the job that he is trying to do, even if he himself is a fairly whimsical character. And we get to see that during his very first true interaction with Blue Beetle post the death of Artemis, in which he managed to steal Blue Beetle's chicken whizzies. And I think he did this intentionally so that he could have an excuse to really talk to Blue Beetle, even though he might play it off as though, oh, I'm just a airhead that did this funny thing. I think a lot of what he does is actually pretty calculated, and I think we get that vibe from his very first appearance. It's in this moment that him and Blue bond, especially because Blue Beetle doesn't really have a mentor, lamenting that Impulse has so many in this large family, whereas he has no one. And this gives Bart the perfect intro to slide himself into that slot as just being a friend with Blue, so the two of them can hang out.
I hear that. You know, we have more in common than you might think. Our love of chicken whizzies, for example.
And while Impulse only started to have this friendship originally to keep an eye on Blue Beetle and ensure that he doesn't turn into the Reach's version of the Mustache Man and enslave all of everybody who's left alive on the planet to work by collecting as many natural resources as possible to continue to drain the Earth of everything it's got, this fake friendship actually ends up turning into a genuine and heartfelt real one. Impulse and Blue Beetle become very close with one another, and even the Scarab eventually comes around to actually liking the Impulse, as he calls it. And while the two heroes were hanging out and testing out their powers and just genuinely building their friendship, which is really cool. I wish we did get, a little bit more scenes like this from this show, because this is part of what I really loved about that first season, was seeing these character interactions, and that's something I think the second season lost a little bit of due to just the sheer volume of characters it was trying to compact into each and every episode. That in the shorter episodes that this season had as well didn't help. But getting back on topic, these two characters end up being ambushed while testing out their powers, and unfortunately it's by Calder and his group of supervillains that we saw throughout the first season during specifically the Bell Rev incident. And Impulse lives up to his name as he takes what he believed to be a communicator that was tracking Blue Beetle and runs it back to the cave, only for it to be revealed that that tracker was exactly what Aqualad wanted so that he could gain access to the cave.
And what is that?
Souvenir?
Souvenirs are Beast Boys thing, yes, eh?
Oh, really? I thought it was Kid Flash.
Can we get to it?
It was this impulsive decision that leads to Bart and everybody else who is currently residing at the cave to be kidnapped and taken into custody. Well, except for Nightwing, because he had to get away, as this was all part of Nightwing's plan, actually, so that he could get information on how to get Lagoon Boy back and keep Calder undercover. But it results in Calder actually blowing up the cave, which was home for a lot of different heroes, Impulse included at the time, I believe. And with Impulse being captured and utterly powerless due to the Metacollar, something that he has way too much experience with, unfortunately. And I mean, just the collar is so degrading. It couldn't have been like anything else. Anyways, with all of that being taken into account, he goes missing for the next couple of episodes as he would be captured by the Reach and is being experimented on as they look for ways to isolate the meta gene and hopefully create a bunch of meta super soldiers of their own. And eventually when Impulse is released by McGann, he does end up going to look for everybody's favorite Scarab user, Blue Beetle. And I actually really like this scene right here just to demonstrate how quick Impulse is, the way they have him dashing in and out of doors super quickly. Another check mark for Kid Flash being slow joke. And eventually we do get a little more insight on his past, and we see him actually slaving away for the Reach, looking for technology and building technology. And we also see it's not his first time dealing with a meta inhibitor collar, and we see what Blue Beetle will eventually become, which is hella scary. He becomes hella scary.
Except you do. And that's the real reason, well, the main reason I came back to the past. To stop you from betraying the human race and bringing on the Reach apocalypse.
This whole episode, we're getting to see nothing but Impulse being genuinely serious. He takes this responsibility of helping Blue Beetle out extremely serious, and I love to see that. He is the goofy, whimsical character that is talking about bringing back souvenirs, and he very much reminds me of a little bit more of an ADHD version of Kid Flash from last season, but with the more locked in aura of Kid Flash from season 2, if that makes sense. But this rescue and explanation strengthens the bond between Jaime and Bart, and also means that the two characters are basically inseparable from this point, but also means that Jaime is feeling extremely limited in what he can do as a hero. This premonition has done a lot of damage to his trust and his faith in his own abilities, and it doesn't help the fact that during an episode which is all about going to therapy, talking out your issues, and discussing what may or may not actually be wrong with you, Bart is encouraging Jaime to not speak at all about his Scarab going bad for fear of the future that he sees coming to fruition.
Nada, amigo. See, I have no idea what actually turns you. For all we know, the League finding out could be the very thing that makes it happen, so I say we say nothing to no one.
And while Bart might have been initially successful in getting the Scarab and Blue Beetle to not talk about anything involving future Blue and the Scarab talking to him and things going wrong in the future, eventually Jaime comes to his senses and ultimately chooses to tell not only what was on his mind about the Scarab, not only about the future premonition, but also that he's genuinely afraid of his powers and them not working properly anyways, even if Impulse doesn't want him to do this. And ironically enough, I believe it is this conversation that gets Nightwing to ask Zatanna to look into how to purify the Scarab and ultimately saves Blue Beetle from Reach's control. So again, Impulse doing his best to try and write the timeline, but he isn't perfect. And in the following episode, we see that Jaime does try to remove the Scarab, but due to the fact that it produces its own antibodies, that doesn't work very well at all. And Bart was actually on standby the entire time just to make sure that his friend was going to be okay and hope that this was going to be successful. Although I don't know what medical training he has to be in that room. Dubious medical training aside, it shows how inseparable the two characters have become, the bond that they're building, and just how dedicated he is to ensuring that his friend does not become an evil overlord that more or less abused him in the future. And even when Blue Beetle was having doubts about his power and his Scarab, especially going undercover to deal with a Reach operation, Impulse was right there to back him up. It's also in this episode that we get a gag about Impulse not knowing how to turn on his stealth suit, and it reminds me a lot of one of my favorite gags from the first season of Young Justice, which also involved a speedster and their stealth suit.
We look ridiculous! Quit touching yourself!
And while the stealth mission was going off without a hitch, that is until Arsenal absolutely messes it all up. And I already have a video talking about him, so if you're interested in that, there should be a little title card up in the top right. Either way, with Arsenal setting off the alarm and trying to blow up the facility, it attracts Black Beetle, a dark mirror into what Blue Beetle could potentially become if he were to go down the path of Reach corruption that Impulse is so desperately trying to prevent. And it also makes Impulse keenly aware of the fact that he needs to find a way to keep Blue safe. And thankfully enough for Blue and Impulse, they might have just found that person to keep them safe. With Black Beetle chasing them, they were then presented with somebody that saved their lives, and that would be Green Beetle, a Martian that also has a Scarab, but one that he asserts does not control him. And of course, the team has to verify this. So they get Miss Martian to read his mind, but because she is so unfortunately mentally blocked with her powers due to breaking Aqualad's mind, believing he was a traitor and then finding out that he was not, she doesn't feel like using her powers to read other people's minds in the same way she used to, reducing her effective ability to read minds to almost nothing, which allows Green Beetle to take advantage of the conversation, present himself as a good guy, which then leads to Jaime trusting him enough to let Green Beetle poke around in his Scarab and supposedly free Jaime from the Reach's control permanently and turn off the Scarab.
Don't you get it, Issy? The Reach can't touch me. I'm free, permanently free.
Crash.
And as we all know, what Green Beetle did was not actually help Jaime and silence the Scarab, it was to give the Scarab full control, both of Jaime's biological body and of the Scarab itself. So he is fully under Reach control as the team has to assault what is called Warworld, which is Mongol's little floating spaceship that he uses to take on other worlds and destroy them and conquer them and take people as pets and all that other weird shit that conquerors do. And when the team was able to successfully take care of the Warworld, it was actually Blue Beetle, revealed to finally be a traitor for the Reach, who took out the entire team and was going to give Warworld to the Reach so that they would have the advantage over the Light in case they wanted to take over the planet. We also get to see how busted Blue Beetle is, considering he takes out almost the entire team. So with the team including Impulse being trapped on Warworld for the foreseeable future, we don't see Impulse for a couple of episodes, as it wouldn't be until Nightwing, McGann, and Arsenal were able to save the rest of the team on Warworld, which Arsenal is partly part of the reason they got caught, so double negative there for him, that Impulse would be freed and that we'd finally get to see his reaction to seeing Blue Beetle going full evil.
Don't blame Blue.
He's just as much a captive of the Reach as we were. We have to set him free, you know, before he conquers the Earth and enslaves all mankind.
And it's in this episode that Impulse desperately tries, along with most of the rest of the team, to get Blue back off mode and hopefully get him back to being Jaime Reyes and not Reach-controlled monster that would go on to genuinely ruin the future. And in order to do so, they have to enact a ritual that the scarab originally went through when it landed on Earth the very first time. And that's why the scarab had absolutely zero Reach oversight or control back when the very first Blue Beetle used the scarab, and when the second Blue Beetle found out it was an alive sentient piece of technology, he chose to not use the scarab at all, favoring to just use his gadgets and intellect, which then of course leads us to Jaime, who actively uses the scarab. So with the team and everybody involved finally at the place where they can purify the scarab, which was also under the control of Queen Bee, which meant dealing with Queen Bee and her soldiers, plus the Reach operatives who have finally somewhat discovered this place due to the fact that Blue Beetle is officially there now, something that Impulse has tried his absolute hardest to keep hidden. They were able to successfully complete the ritual because this time, instead of Impulse making a mistake or some impulsive move, he was actually able to get Green Beetle to take the shot of Blue Beetle and ultimately save Zatanna, letting her complete the ritual and free both Green Beetle and Blue Beetle, who would go on to be instrumental in defeating the Reach. But this means that Impulse succeeded, and while he might have made a lot of fails and blunders while working his way up to succeeding because he didn't exactly have a roadmap, he did ultimately make all the right and necessary decisions to save his friend and save the future.
Hey, making sure you stayed a hero was the main reason I came back to the past. So I was motivated to take my mouth off mode. Don't you get used to it now.
This version of Impulse is definitely wildly different than the one that we saw in the comics or really in any other ad. I don't actually think Impulse was really adapted in much of anything prior to Young Justice. So scratch that whole in other adaptations part. But for the most part, Impulse in this show is very different. He comes from a dystopian future. He is still this ADHD, bouncing off the walls, very fun-loving, life-enjoying kid, but at the same time, we see this genuine seriousness, this depth to his character in which he is struggling with the fact that he has to save the future. He feels like the weight of the world is genuinely on his shoulders. And if he does not succeed, then ultimately the entire world will crumble around him and the future will be ruined if he's not perfect. It's a lot of pressure to put on his young shoulders, and I think personally he deflects with humor and laughter and enjoyment, something that he didn't really get a lot of in the future that he's from. He's finally getting the chance to be himself and to have fun, and we see so many elements of Wally specifically in this version of Impulse. And speaking of Wally, that leads us into our last two episodes. With the two-part finale, The Reach and the Light were finally at a head, the two of them both vying for control of the Earth and manipulating and using each other were finally ousted to one another by Calder in all of his undercover work and all of the sacrifices that he made, which then allowed the team and whatever heroes were left on Earth, due to the fact that the Justice League were clearing their names in court across the galaxy, were able to come in and clean house and defeat a lot of the villains that were there, including the Reach. And it is in this moment that we get to see, since Impulse is stuck in the past and Kid Flash is looking to retire, that he's also looking to pass on the mantle of Kid Flash to Impulse.
Seriously? Hey, once this whole invasion thing's over, Artemis and I are going back into retirement. Someone needs to carry on the family tradition.
Dude, that is so Crash!
It's this really great full circle moment that also appears in the comics as well, with Impulse being the Wally West Flash's sidekick and eventually taking up the moniker of Kid Flash to honor Wally, somebody that he really looked up to. And this was Wally's way of honoring Bart and honoring the fact that he wants to continue the Kid Flash and by extension Flash legacy. It was a very beautiful moment and kind of echoes where not only Wally was with his character, but also where Impulse was, where he very much is this happy middle ground between the more serious Wally that we got in this second season and the more fun and souvenir collecting guy that we had in the first season. But unfortunately, Wally would never be able to see Impulse take on the Mantle of Kid Flash properly, as with the Reach losing, being a bunch of sore losers, they try to annihilate the Earth, and the only way to stop this bomb, as it was activated and different than the rest, since they can't use Luthor's technology, they're going to have to run around to create enough kinetic energy to destabilize it. And much like as was shown when dealing with Neutron back at the very start of this video, Kid Flash would join them, but he would be much slower than either of the other two Flashes. And in a mirror to him being lapped when he was attacked by Neutron, he ultimately ends up fading away, giving his life as an energy release valve so that the world can be saved. And now Bart has to take up this identity as Kid Flash while no longer having someone that was supposed to be his mentor in that way.
You look good.
Really? Because I feel like a fraud.
Well, don't. You're honoring Wally's memory by becoming Kid Flash. I know he'd be proud.
Thanks.
Like I said earlier, it's this great full circle moment, but it's really bittersweet considering that Wally is no longer with us. I think it's also very poignant that the holograms used to represent the fallen compatriots are no longer hidden away in a cave, but rather put front and center inside of the actual watchtower, where people can visit them more easily rather than being kept and hidden away. Wally's memory and legacy will truly be honored by Impulse taking up that mantle of Kid Flash, by holding on to that hope and perseverance for the future that he held throughout all of this season, while also keeping that whimsy and fun that made Kid Flash so enjoyable throughout the show. And that's another thing that I think this show does wonderfully, is the idea of legacy heroes. That second season is truly all about legacy and what we leave behind, not just as superheroes, but also as people. And Wally left behind a beautiful legacy, one that Impulse was more than willing to take upon himself, one that separates him from this dark future that he was sent to protect, and one that gives a hopeful outlook for a future that he can help work towards. So, I don't think this version of Impulse was perfect. I think he was fun, chaotic, insane, very serious at times that he needed to be. I thought he brought a lot of good energy to the show and very much gave me that season 1 Kid Flash vibe. But he's almost nothing like his comic book counterpart in characterization, but I also believe that's part of what makes him so special as a character this season and so enjoyable to watch. It was definitely a strange option not to have him included in the original lineup and to instead replace him with Wally. I think it all ultimately worked out for the best, and I find it ironic that he would be the one replacing Wally, much as Wally did take his place in the Young Justice lineup at the beginning of the show's inception. Overall, I really enjoyed getting to watch all of Impulse's time on the show and getting to see his clips and things of that nature. I very much do like this character and I think he's fun. So thank you all for watching. If you want to like the video, please leave a like, helps out the channel a lot. If you want to subscribe, as I mentioned earlier, it will definitely help this out. As well, if you want to dislike and leave some constructive criticism in the comments below, that'll go a long way to me being a better creator for all of you. And finally, I have a Patreon linked in the description where you can see these videos a little bit early. You can see them without the changes I have to make to the footage for copyright reasons. So you can see them as I intended the video to be put out, which now also includes a little bit of extra time on some of these clips from the show as well. And finally, you can just go there to support me as a creator to make more content for you all. So thank you all so much for watching. Your viewership is more than enough. Don't feel like you have to go to the Patreon. So thank you so much. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic day.